The smell hit first. Not the expected scent of rot and damp wood. Something older. Something that had been sealed away from the world for a very long time, waiting, as if it had been holding its breath. In the spring of 2023, Tom and Karen Whitfield purchased a 1920s craftsman bungalow on the outskirts of Harnett Falls, a small borough in central Pennsylvania that most maps barely bother to name. The price had been low because the house needed what the real estate agent called significant attention. The floors in the back bedroom had gone soft with decades of neglect, the wood swollen and buckled, exhaling a persistent odor that no amount of ventilation seemed to chase away. Tom was a retired contractor. He had pulled up failing floorboards before. He was 3 boards deep into the back bedroom when his crowbar struck something unexpected. Not a joist, not a pipe, a hollow space beneath the subfloor. Deliberate, framed, and sealed with care that had no reason to exist in a standard residential construction of that era. Karen heard him call her name from the kitchen. Something in his voice made her set down her coffee cup very carefully before she walked down the hall. Inside the compartment were 3 things. A woman's leather Oxford shoe, size 6, with the initials MC, hand-stamped into the inner sole. A linen handkerchief bearing the same monogram in faded blue embroidery. And bones, small brown fragmented, arranged by time and gravity into the quiet geometry of the forgotten. Someone had put her there. And someone had built a floor over the top of her and walked across it every day and said nothing for 75 years. This is the story of Margaret Calloway, a young woman who disappeared from Harnett Falls, Pennsylvania, on a cold Friday evening in November of 1948. A woman whose case was never solved, whose file was partially destroyed, and whose name had, for most of the last half-century, existed only in the fragile memory of a single aging relative. Before we go any further, if stories like this matter to you, if you believe that names should not be forgotten, please take a moment to subscribe. It costs you nothing, and for the people in these stories, it means everything. Margaret Eleanor Calloway was born on the 14th of March, 1922, in Harnett Falls, the only daughter of Robert Calloway, a lumberyard foreman, and his wife, Dorothea. She grew up 3 blocks from the elementary school where she would eventually teach, in a town where everyone knew your family name before they learned your face. By all accounts, Margaret was a woman of quiet, genuine warmth, 5 feet and 3 inches tall, with dark chestnut hair and gray-green eyes that her mother described, in a letter written years after her disappearance, as the color of the river in October, when the light is going. She had graduated from Lock Haven State Teachers College in 1944 and returned to Harnett Falls to teach 3rd grade at Birch Creek Elementary. Her former students, now elderly, remember her with a consistency that is itself a kind of testimony. She was patient. She was funny in a quiet way that surprised you. She read aloud every Friday afternoon and did the voices without embarrassment. In the spring of 1948, Margaret became engaged to James Allen Pruitt. Pruitt was 32, solidly built, with a reputation in town as dependable. The kind of man people said you called when something needed fixing. He had served in the Pacific, returned in '46, and taken over his father's hardware store on Main Street. Their engagement was announced in the Harnett Falls Courier on the 22nd of May. Margaret was 26. The wedding had been set for the following June. On Thursday, the 18th of November, the day before she vanished, Margaret stayed late after school, spent the evening helping her mother hem a skirt, and walked James Pruitt to the door when he stopped by after supper. She told him she would see him Friday. She was wearing, when she left the house the following morning, a gray wool skirt, a cream blouse, her camel coat, and a pair of dark leather Oxford shoes, size 6, with her initials stamped into the inner sole. She had bought those shoes to last. The 19th of November, 1948, fell on a Friday. The temperature at dawn was 29 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was the color of old pewter, low and featureless. Margaret arrived at Birch Creek Elementary at 7:55, taught her standard Friday curriculum, and at 4 o'clock walked out of the school for the last time. The custodian watched her cross the front yard and turn toward Elm Street. He noted she was walking at her usual pace and appeared to be in no distress. From the school to Voss Pharmacy on Elm Street was a 7-minute walk. Harold Voss confirmed that Margaret came through his door at approximately 10 minutes past 4. She picked up a small order, hand cream and bobby pins, and they exchanged a few words about the cold. Harold held the door for her on her way out. He watched her turn right onto Elm Street, in the direction of Sycamore, in the direction of home. That was 4:17 in the afternoon. Harold Voss was the last person known to have seen Margaret Calloway alive. Between Voss Pharmacy and the Calloway house was a distance of 4 blocks. The walk took no more than 8 minutes. She never arrived. Dorothea Calloway began watching from the front window at 4:45. By 5:15, she had put on her coat. By 5:30, she was on the telephone, 4 blocks, 8 minutes, and somewhere inside that small, unremarkable distance, something happened that would not be understood for 3/4 of a century. The Harnett Falls Borough Police Department was not equipped for a missing persons investigation of any complexity. Chief Raymond Hobart dispatched Officer Dale Marsh, who walked the route with a flashlight, knocked on several doors, and found nothing. His report concluded with a line that proved both accurate and inadequate. Subject's whereabouts presently unknown. Within days, a detail emerged that the chief considered significant. Several residents had seen an unfamiliar man in a dark automobile parked along Elm Street on 2 separate occasions that week. The stranger in the dark car became the investigation's primary focus. He was never identified. He was never found. James Pruitt was interviewed twice. His account was straightforward. At the hardware store until 5:45, then directly to Sycamore Street. A clerk confirmed he had been present during business hours, but the clerk had left at 5 o'clock. The 45 minutes between closing time and Pruitt's arrival at the Calloway house rested entirely on his own word. State Police Sergeant William Dietz noted the gap in his report and flagged it as requiring further attention. That attention never fully materialized. Dorothea Calloway never used the past tense when speaking of her daughter. She did not say Margaret was a wonderful teacher. She said Margaret is. By January of 1949, the active investigation had narrowed to a single file updated irregularly, and then, by the following spring, not at all. In the spring of 1949, 4 months after Margaret's disappearance, James Pruitt undertook a renovation of the house he had recently purchased on the northern edge of Harnett Falls. A small craftsman bungalow. According to a contractor's ledger that survived the decades, the renovation included new flooring throughout. The contractor reported that Pruitt had insisted on doing the back bedroom himself. He was capable, the contractor said. He knew what he was doing with wood. No one thought anything of it at the time. Through the 1950s, Margaret's name surfaced occasionally, at church, at the diner, in the way that unresolved things resurface in small towns. Chief Hobart retired in 1953 without advancing the case. His successor reviewed the file, found nothing actionable, and moved on. Pruitt remained in Harnett Falls through the 50s, running the hardware store with the same steady reliability that had always defined his reputation. He did not remarry. He attended church. He served on the borough council. He was, by all external measures, a man living an unremarkable life. In 1961, he sold the hardware store and left Harnett Falls without announcement or farewell. A neighbor said Pruitt had simply been there 1 week and gone the next. He left no forwarding address. The bungalow on the northern edge of town was sold to a young couple within the year. Dorothea Calloway died in January of 1964. She had never stopped leaving the porch light on, Her son Thomas, returning to clear out the yellow house on Sycamore Street, found in his mother's bedside drawer a folded newspaper clipping, the Courier announcement of Margaret's engagement from May of 1948. His mother had kept it for 16 years. There was nothing written on it. She had simply kept it. In 1974, a fire in the basement of Borough Hall destroyed a significant portion of municipal records from the 40s and 50s, including the original police reports from Margaret's case. The case, already thin, became thinner still. By the time the 20th century ended, Margaret Calloway existed in the public record as 4 sentences and a blurred photograph. Tom and Karen Whitfield began work on the bungalow in April of 2023. The back bedroom was the worst room in the house. The floor had deteriorated to the point where walking on it produced a soft, uncertain give that Tom recognized immediately as subfloor failure. He began pulling boards on the morning of April the 14th. The first 3 came up without incident. The 4th resisted. He repositioned his crowbar, applied more force, and the board came free with a crack sharper than expected, followed by a sound he did not expect at all. Not the hollow resonance of a standard joist cavity. Something different, a deeper register, a sealed space. He removed 2 more boards carefully. What he found was a framed compartment approximately 3 feet by 2 feet, constructed between the joists with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with the standard construction of the house. Someone had built this. Someone who knew how floors were made, how to frame a hidden space that would bear weight and leave no visible sign from the surface. Someone who had done it carefully, and done it once, and done it to last. The folded cloth at the bottom had decomposed almost entirely. The handkerchief was identifiable only by its shape, but the shoe, the left Oxford dark leather, size 6, had held its form with the stubbornness of well-made things, and the bones, scattered and brown with age, were unmistakably what they were. Karen made the call to 911 at 11:47 in the morning. The State Police Forensic Unit reached the scene by early afternoon. The forensic examination took several weeks. The bones were fragmentary and disarticulated. 74 years of enclosed decay had done what time does to the unburied. What the forensic anthropologist could confirm, the remains were human, female, consistent with a young adult, and dated to the mid-20th century. DNA extraction was difficult after more than 7 decades. A partial mitochondrial profile was obtained, but could not be matched without a direct maternal line reference sample. The shoe, the handkerchief, and the initials MC became the most specific identifiers available. Investigators cross-referenced them against Margaret Calloway's physical description in the surviving state police file, including Dorothea's description of her daughter's shoes from a canvas interview in November of 1948. Size 6. Dark leather. Good quality. She had bought them to last. The compartment told its own story. The framing technique, the method of sistering the joists, the type of cut nail at the corners, was consistent with skilled carpentry from the late 1940s. It was not original to the house. It had been added during a renovation, and the renovation records that survived placed James Allen Pruitt in that room, with those tools, in the months after Margaret Calloway had ceased to exist. James Pruitt had died in Portland, Oregon, in October of 1987, at the age of 71. He had worked as a Finnish carpenter for over 2 decades. He had never married. He left no children, no confession, no final accounting of any kind. The Pennsylvania State Police reopened the Calloway case formally in May of 2023. Investigators found nothing in Portland that advanced the case. What they had was a sealed compartment built by a man who knew how to build things, in a house he had owned, 4 months after a woman he had been engaged to had walked out of a pharmacy and never reached home. What they did not have was proof of how she died, or what happened in those 4 blocks on the evening of November the 19th, 1948. The cause of death remained undetermined. The manner of her death remained officially unknown. In a community room at the Harnett Falls Public Library, 3 weeks after the discovery, a woman named Carol Thorne, 83 years old, Thomas Calloway's daughter, Margaret's niece, sat across a table from a detective and looked at a photograph of the shoe. She had grown up with the story the way children in families like hers grow up with such things. Not as history, but as weather. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she folded her hands on the table in front of her, in exactly the way the detective would note in his report that her grandmother Dorothea had been described standing on a porch in the dark in November of 1948. And she said, "I always knew she didn't just leave." The theory investigators consider most consistent with the evidence is also the most difficult one to sit with. That Margaret Calloway was killed by someone she trusted, someone who had stood beside her in a church and walked her home on winter evenings and been announced in the newspaper as her future husband, and that this person then used the skills of his hands to erase all physical evidence of what he had done and continued to live in the community where he had done it for more than a decade before quietly disappearing himself. There are elements that remain unexplained. The stranger in the dark car was never identified. The DNA profile was never matched. The construction date of the compartment was never independently verified to a specific week. The case remains open. Margaret Calloway has never been formally declared a homicide victim. In the autumn of 2023, Carol Thorne arranged for a small memorial stone to be placed in the cemetery where Dorothea was buried in 1964. The stone bears Margaret's name, her birth year, and the year her remains were found. It does not record the year of her death because that year remains officially unknown. What it records instead is the year she was found, the year someone finally pulled up the floor. She had bought those shoes to last. She could not have known how true that would prove, that they would outlast the silence, outlast the man who built the floor, outlast the town that forgot her name. In the end, it was the most ordinary thing she owned that brought her home. My name is not important. What is important is that Margaret Eleanor Calloway, born the 14th of March, 1922, in Harnett Falls, Pennsylvania, is no longer missing. She has a stone now. She has a place. And if you believe that matters, if you believe that names like hers deserve to be spoken aloud, that stories like this one deserve to be told, then subscribe, because there are others. There are always others. And as long as we keep looking, they are never entirely lost.